All right, here we are for another editor podcast. How you doing, Jenny Donuts?
Jenny Donuts is just doing fine.
Have you made people call that in the real world space? Have you made people call you that?
You know, the few people I actually said that had been my nickname gave me strange looks. So maybe it's more of an inside joke.
Well, I mean, they were also strangers at the store, right? So they probably didn't have much context.
You know, it's weird how people just don't warm up to you when you approach them randomly with information like that.
Yeah, especially when you're wearing a mask.
I saw a mask yesterday you've seen these where they have the kind of the big clown smiles on them or whatever. I like that. I might have to get one that actually has. Well, we could talk about
of scaring people in the store.
Yeah, exactly. So, speaking of food tech, that's what we want to do next. I think, Chris, you had a story about Heineken UK with their new Green Grip sustainable packaging. What's the story here?
Yeah, so do you remember, Mike, you and I are a little bit older than our elder millennial co-host here, right? And in the 70s, I remember the big thing that, you always had to cut your plastic rings, right? That's when the idea that these 6-pack holders that were held together with plastic rings were trapping fish in the ocean. Do you remember that? Like there was a big push for that.
I still do that.
The problem didn't go away is kind of the point here, right? Like decades later, not only is it still ensnaring fish and turtles, these rings that hold together your 6-pack of whatever, but they're also plastic and they don't go away for thousands of years, right? So Heineken UK announced that it is it's replacing its plastic rings for its multi-packs and replacing it with cardboard, which is 100% plastic free and recyclable. And they're the latest company in writing that story. I learned that Coca-Cola in Europe was also doing this, creating a paper top. So, there's no real downside to it as far as I can tell. And it's about time, really.
I think it's part of a larger trend of just more sustainable packaging, which I think has picked up even more momentum since the pandemic started, because people are just buying more things, more consumer packaged goods. They're having lots of things delivered, which brings us to your story, Jen. You wrote about the Thermopack or Temper Pack, which is basically this packaging where you get a food item shipped to you in the mail. And I have to say, before I read your story, I had actually gotten 2 things shipped to me over the past couple of weeks using this exact paper packaging. And I think a lot of people probably are familiar with it. And I just, quite honestly, was so thankful to see it because, like many of you, I would get meal kits or something from a grocery delivery company, an online grocery delivery company, and I was just always feeling so guilty about the packaging. So this just looks like a much more sustainable approach.
Yeah, and they actually supply HelloFresh with packaging for its meal kits. Temper Pack, they raised $31 million Series C. Just recently, they announced it this week. And yeah, their packaging, they say it's made from plants and paper, but the big sell is that it's styrofoam free, which obviously is that's like the plastic rings. Like, why did styrofoam never go away after we discovered how horrible it is for the planet? But I think in terms of I agree with you, Mike. I think the packaging question and the sustainable packaging materials, that whole issue has just gotten bigger. I feel like it got ignored for a little bit at first. I mean, granted, we were in an unprecedented situation no one had ever dealt with before, health crisis, so I get it. But yeah, we're getting so much, meal kits, restaurant food, groceries, everything is delivered now. And if we don't, the industry, as it were, if it doesn't figure out a way to make these packaging materials more sustainable, it's just going to wreak havoc on the planet more so than it already is.
Yeah, I think I was reading a Scientific American article was talking about the sort of squeeze that's happening with plastic packaging because everybody's ordering, but restaurant delivery, that single-use takeout, right? And a lot of people are at home ordering that. Or like if I get my groceries at Walmart, every single thing seems to be in its own plastic bag. Mm-hmm. And I have no control over that because they do all the picking and packing, right? So that's happening. But at the same time, recycling centers are closed down because of budgetary concerns. And I think even like the big move last year, a couple of years ago, was China stopped buying our recycling. Mm-hmm. So we had an impending recycling crisis to begin with. But this even also, Mike, I think last month, was it, or the month before that, Dishcraft, the robotics company, came out with a reusable, washable, like to-go container to be used in cafeterias and stuff. So to your point, like packaging and how we think about how we're getting things is certainly seems to be, at least at the beginning stages of sort of a rethought.
Yeah, I remember April, March, and everyone just like started panic buying, and we kind of threw out this idea of sustainable packaging seen for a little while, so we focused on other things. But as it turns out, a lot of people didn't, and some of these bigger companies and some of the delivery companies were continuing to think about this. So the Temperpack actually uses a patented, looks like it's called Climacell, mm-hmm. and it's like this paper-based insulation material. It comes on 4 different sides, and you can throw it all in the recycle bin. It's a much more sustainable approach.
Yeah, that was another part of their big just pitch, is that it doesn't have to be taken to a specialty center to be recycled, because that is the big thing with a lot of packing materials, is it says it's recyclable, but it's recyclable if you jump through 6 hoops of fire and drive across town to get rid of it. And even then, we're not really sure if it's being recycled or if it's just going to the landfill. So this aspect of curbside pickup for the materials is a big sell for the company.
Yeah, the one mistake, have you seen like the cornstarch based ones that are in plastic? Don't let those get wet, because it becomes a sticky, awful, like just gooey mess. Like if you let the dry ice or whatever just sit in there, and
interesting.
It becomes this weird. Yeah, I learned firsthand. Speaking of which, how you guys disposing of your dry ice? I'm getting tons of dry ice, and if I order through Crowd Cow or Brave Robot ice cream, it comes frozen. What do you do? How do you guys get rid of your dry ice? Do you just let it sit out, or do you have fun with it and do a little science?
You usually just let it melt and then dispose of the liquid afterwards. Do you actually do science experiments with your kid? Sure. I remember when you were young. When I was young, dry ice was actually a lot of fun. Yeah,
I put it in the sink and create a little mist, kind of thing. But it takes forever to sort of break down. Anyway, I'm digressing. But
but these. Just going back to the packaging thing, have you ever gotten, and we all have, like something in shipped from Amazon or whatever, and it had that styrofoam, and styrofoam is actually so hard to get rid of, and you just felt so guilty putting it into. Amazon over the last couple of years have moved towards those air-filled bags, which seems a lot more sustainable, and they say recyclable on them, but
they're exactly what I was talking about. They're recycled in a lot of places. They're recyclable if you jump through 6 hoops of fire and drive across town.
Got it. Do you guys remember? I remember when McDonald's moved away from the Big Mac styrofoam case, and that was like actually a big deal. That was maybe at least over a dozen years ago. But it always amazed me how long Dunkin took to move away from the styrofoam. Like, I don't think Dunkin announced that they're moving away from styrofoam at least to the last year or so.
I think it was 2019. They made a really big announcement. I believe we covered it. That said, we're finally, we have a goal to get rid of styrofoam by, I think it was like 2023 or something like that.
Literally like the last company on earth maybe to move away from styrofoam cups. I don't know what took them so long.
Well, I think so. I have heard from different people that there are restaurants that will make you use, like for franchisees or whatever, you only get styrofoam cups unless you sell a certain amount. And so, styrofoam is probably still super cheap to do, but like that was a couple of years ago, so maybe that had changed. But I was really surprised to hear that, because I was like, why are you still using styrofoam cups? And they were just like, well, we don't sell enough. If we make more money, they'll give us. So
I almost felt like it was kind of, that Dunkin' coffee, that big cup and this big styrofoam cup, it was part of their brand almost. Like it felt to me like they were sticking with it. Maybe it was because it was cheap, but it felt like they were sticking with it because that core New England Dunkin' Donuts bro maybe like to styrofoam. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but it seemed like it was part of their identity.
I think whether they intended it or not, it was absolutely part of their identity. But I think the Dunkin thing and just this conversation brings up a good point of just, so much of the restaurant experience is going out of the restaurant now for good, that it's just, I can't see a future in which, third-party delivery companies aren't somehow getting on board with sustainable packaging, and restaurants, if they can. Obviously they're hit really hard in other areas right now, but it's just, I feel like it's got to become a mandate for the restaurant industry to move to widespread sustainable packaging, because we're not going back to the dining room as the main attraction sort of lifestyle for, I would say, a very long time, if ever.
Yeah, Dishcraft said that it was working with like cities, or potentially working with cities to create like drop-off bins almost, so that restaurants could adopt the reusable to-go container, and then, someone you could just take it down to the corner and drop it off into a thing. And that's been the thing with Woowa Brothers talked about it for a long time, which is if you have robots delivering you food, they take a container back, right? Like they take the recycling back. So they're working both sides of the trip, not just one way, which is another interesting idea.
So I excuse me if I'm skeptical on that, but like if you, I guess if you're expecting a consumer to take packaging to a drop-off point, like I just never see that happening. Not that it shouldn't be, like what Dishcraft is doing is admirable, but I don't ever see consumers running packaging after a drop-off point. Is that part of the
I think that it is very early. What I think they're trying to figure out is, right, their whole model right now is they're working with offices that have cafeterias or whatever, or restaurants,
sure.
Right? So it's, how do you get people to adopt the idea of, I'm not just going to take this and then throw it in the garbage, right? Especially as these issues become more important. So one of the things they were exploring, at least, was like, oh, maybe we could work with the city and set up drop boxes, kinds of things. Again, I agree with you. I imagine that people just be like, but if you had the delivery person or robot doing things both ways, then that becomes a little more interesting.
And it certainly becomes more likely if it's a non-consumer type of application or scenario where you have a corporate account taking their bulk of packaging and maybe dropping it off in bulk rather than like a consumer. Because as we know, we consumers are lazy. And we're not going to.
My solution to the styrofoam peanuts was I just dropped them off in your backyard, Mike. I don't know if you noticed, but then I didn't. And
I would take your peanuts and give them to my children as Christmas gifts. So the circle of life. Well, moving on to the next story. This news was welcome, if only because the Anova Combi steam oven has been 4 years in the making. Chris, we both got briefed on this. You wrote the story on it this morning. Anova, they announced last year that this thing was going to ship this year. They first announced their steam oven, the precision oven, at SmartCatcher Summit in 2016. So it looks like it's imminent, and we actually have a price for it.
Yeah. So, Mike, how many countertop ovens can I have in my kitchen?
I think that's a conversation for you and your wife to have.
Well, I sort of broached the topic yesterday after writing the story. I was like, so there's this steam oven. So Anova announced it's you can buy it now for $5.99. It ships in North America the end of September and the rest of the world in December. And it is this, it's a combination steam and convection oven. And what it allows you to do is adjust the humidity in the cooking cavity. Now, why is this important? Well, if you think about cooking something like a chicken, if you have a wet heat, right? Like if you have 100% humidity in the cavity, then the juice from within a chicken can't escape anywhere. The water can't escape anywhere. So the result is that you have a juicier bird at the end. But because the Anova is also a convection oven and you can control these things, you can ratchet down the humidity and raise the temperature. So what you're basically doing, like in the chicken scenario, is you're basically sous videing it, right? Like it is very precise. It has 3 temperature sensors and it doesn't vacillate wildly in between temperatures or oscillate or whatever the word is, right? And so you can cook it low and slow like you would sous vide, but you don't need to do a water bath. and then you can ratchet up the heat, the dry heat, to get that crispy skin on the outside. So it's like both things at once. And it's interesting to hear Anova talk about it. You talked with Scott Heimendinger back at CES when we were allowed to travel and go out into the world. But the idea of this kind of steam oven where it's not, so the idea is like, what's important to note is that it's not like you're steaming vegetables. It's a whole different kind of thing. It's using humidity and heat in companionship. And it has some guided cooking and some automated cook programs. So I kind of want one.
So what would it work for that's a non-meat item, or is it more for cooking chickens and stuff?
No, anything. Like you can vegetables,
okay.
Like bread is another one that they say that it does really well. So like
yeah. I mean, Scott Heimendinger was cooking lots of bread when he was showing it off on social media. But I mean, I think the idea of a combi oven. I remember, I think it was Phil Tessier, the chief chef for Heston, a couple years ago at Smart Kitchen Summit, was asked what consumer appliance he wanted at that wasn't really there in a wide way, and he pointed to the combi oven. I know that Wilson Rothman has been talking about steam as like a really important potential application. There is a Breville combi oven out there that is almost in consumer price points, but like definitely this idea of steam in the consumer kitchen hasn't really taken off. But I think potentially steam ovens could be the next big thing. You, Chris, I know you like the Taval oven. I've used it as well, and it does certainly make your food better. And so I think it isn't necessary. I don't expect this thing to fly off the shelves in tens of millions of units, much like we saw like the Instant Pot, like those types of numbers initially. But I think it could definitely go to those kind of foodie types that embrace sous vide initially, and then potentially have a much wider audience than we saw even with sous vide over time.
So with Anova's big pitch is, right, like sous vide used to be only for professionals, and then they brought it to the kitchen, and then now they're doing that with combi ovens. And I think what they're doing is creating sort of a prosumer with this model, at least, right? Like it's priced $600, ain't cheap. But they're sort of creating a category, carving out a new niche. There are a lot of connected countertop ovens, but this is sort of its own thing.
I was going to ask both of you, since you're both your marriages are on the rocks because of your connected ovens in the kitchen. Do you all even use your regular built-in ovens anymore? Like with all these things, with all these devices coming out, I mean, is there even a need for that for enthusiasts like you all?
For baking, I use my oven, but for like quick for dinner, increasingly it's been the countertop stuff. Like I use my Instant Pot or my air fryer a couple times a week. I don't know, maybe Chris, I know that you've been using your June for a while.
Yeah, I use the June all the time, and it's especially during the nice time of year up here where it's so rare. Like we up in the Northwest, we don't get a lot, and the summer is awesome, but it's fleeting. So I don't want to spend a lot of time, or let me phrase, I don't cook a lot. So my wife doesn't want to spend a lot of time necessarily in front of the oven. She wants to be outside enjoying the weather, and so you can just throw salmon in the June and go, hey, cook this salmon, and it does it automatically, right? So there are bigger things like I don't know, turkeys at Thanksgiving, and then other things, just straight baking that a traditional ovens seem to do a bit better with.
It's so interesting that so much of the new technology is all on the countertop. I know that, a couple years ago, Whirlpool tried to push a modular KitchenAid smart oven with the ability to add different kind of components into it. I expect, because Whirlpool does a refresh of the product cycle every couple of years in a big way, so we might see something this next year from them in terms of built-in. And if you remember, Chris, June actually tried to do a built-in of their June oven, which was basically they took their countertop and tried to stuff it into a cavity.
Yeah, it was a wall. It was like a mount or something like that, right?
Yeah, it was a mount of basically what their countertop was. But I expect over time we'll see a lot of the stuff move into the built-in, because people want to continue to have built-in stuff, even though I do think overall people are moving towards smaller living scenarios. I think millennials and people living in urban environments may not have like the built-ins. I expect this technology over time to migrate. And I definitely think combi ovens is one of the categories that I would expect to see to grow over the coming years.
I want a connected oven that works like a Murphy bed. You just pull it out of the wall.
Well, aren't most ovens like that? Like,
well, I think it's a generational thing too. Like, I can't imagine walking into a house. Like, if I was going to buy a house and I was like, oh, well, there's no oven. You can just use your countertop oven, right? Like, that'd be like, oh, that's kind of weird, right? But that may be generation. That may be phasing out. But as devices get smarter, right? Like, I like having a June countertop oven, but I want to invest in a June, like thousands of dollars in a June, like traditional sized oven. It gets back to like the whole idea of a smart fridge, right? Like, what happens when that gets bricked? But I'm less nervous about it if it's a countertop one.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think the June partnership, was with the outdoor grill company, right? Like, you had the comfort knowing that they were working with, I can't remember which grill company did they work with, Chris?
Weber.
So Weber's not going away, right? So I've always felt my feeling was June would probably do well to have a strategy where they partner and make their company almost like their product technology almost like an Android, and have it power some built-in ovens by like some larger brands. I don't know if they're going that way because
Tovala did that with LG, right? It expanded the scan to cook with LG. I don't know. I don't think any of that's come to market yet, but I'm not sure. But they announced that.
So, yeah, I mean, I think there is a worry with startups and built-ins, whether or not it'll be supported over time. But I think a company like June would do well to work with some of the bigger brands. But moving on to the next story, Jen, I think you had this one about Pop ID's Pay by Face. I know that like Face Pay has been around in Asia for a while, but it looks like it's finally coming to the U.S. in a bigger way.
Yeah. So Pop ID, who makes facial recognition technology, they did a huge deployment of their tech in restaurants and retail stores around Pasadena, California. And they sent this ginormous list. And, small restaurants, larger chains, but essentially how it works in the restaurant setting is a user signs up for a Pop ID account and they can now link their debit or credit card. And then when they are ordering food, like at the counter, at the drive up or something, the system can just scan their face. It'll pull up their profile. And with the addition of adding the payment stuff, it will just automatically charge them when they order. And it looks to me like it is sort of takes different forms in different settings. Like with a self-order kiosk in a restaurant, you would still have to touch a few buttons on the screen to tell the system what you want to eat. But they did sort of hint that it also would work table side. So a server would actually hold up a handheld device, scan your face when you're sitting down, and your info's all there and you never have to touch the device to order and pay for your food.
So what happens when your payment's denied? Do they say face denied? Like I mean, I think it makes sense. I mean, it's not really all that different from biometric paying of like your fingerprint or some sort of like, I pay with my Apple ID and it uses my thumb to kind of verify. So it's really just kind of moving face pay. I mean, I think there is some potential privacy issues that people just probably are going to be a little bit more freaked out about it, but it's probably just going to continue to happen.
At WWDC this year, Apple unveiled Clips, where if you're going into a restaurant, you can use Apple Pay. You don't have to download like the restaurant's full app and set up an account, right? Like if they use Apple Pay, you can just go in and you just grab the bit of that restaurant's app that you need to pay and then use Apple Pay. And so you don't have to enter a credit card or anything. Like that to me seems like a more viable solution than having someone record my face, because no one wants to record my face. I mean, come on. We do this thing for audio for a reason.
I don't know. I think it's going to bring up the bigger question of, back up a year ago, and a lot of folks probably would have been creeped out by the idea of paying with your face. I mean, I think a large majority of the facial recognition posts we've written all mention the creep factor. But now we've got the pandemic, we've got new health issues, we've got new health standards in the restaurant, and new concerns from consumers. So, I think the bigger question, which is yet to be answered, is how much of their own personal data and biometric information are customers willing to part with for the promise of safety?
we don't freak out as much about the idea of fingerprint scans or even retinal scans. Like, I mean, that's kind of been in movies for a while. I just think it's like, it just sounds creepy, right? Like face pay is probably not a great brand exercise in branding. So I think maybe, maybe they need to move away from it. But yeah, I just think it's, for some reason, the paying with your face seems like a weird thing to people. All right, final story of the day, guys. I wrote about this last week, and this has been a story that's kind of been brewing for a little bit. GE has launched essentially a company within a company called Chibo. And what Chibo is basically a online cooking class platform. So if you're a chef or you're like an online Instagram influencer type and you want to teach people how to cook and you want to monetize that, they actually created a platform to do that. And it took them like over a year as they experimented with it. They recruited their first class of influencers and figured out what exactly would go in a platform that these influencers would want. They took them a year to develop it. And so they launched Chibo. They were kind of quiet for a while. Yeah, so I think it's kind of interesting. But you guys have certainly seen like this whole bunch of chefs and influencers like Eric Rivera go online and want to cook cooking classes. A lot of times they're just using Zoom. So this offers a way, or an alternative to that, and a way to monetize.
How long term is this? Because, what is Chibo setting up in your mind here, Mike? Like, it's GE's a big company and, they're putting some resources into this, but like, I mean, I haven't done an online cooking class. I have no interest in it.
There's certainly like no shortage of people who want to use physical trainers, right? Like, yeah. So I think what they're trying to do is they think it's somewhat analogous to people who take training through things like working out. I think you've heard the term, Peloton for the kitchen, I think like the Food Network they're pushing that concept. I think there's a couple people trying to push that concept. Now, whether or not like people want personal training of how to cook in the kitchen, like long term, I don't know. But I certainly think like people use a lot of things like YouTube videos. Like I use YouTube videos all the time to learn how to do a cooking technique or when there's a new recipe. Whether that converts to like more white glove service where someone's actually training you, it remains to be seen.
I love the idea, to be honest, although I actually belong to a virtual gym. So I do that whole like instruction training online thing. And I think what's really interesting is the potential it has where I'm just, I'm stretching here, but I'm just thinking of, this issue we talk about with food waste. People don't know how to use certain ingredients or certain skills of what's in their refrigerator. Could someday we have guided cooking for, let me learn some basic skills about how to use the tops of carrots in a recipe or things like that. I think it has the potential to really grow into a lot of different areas that could help at-home cooks just gain some more skills that we've lost over the last several decades just by the nature of how much easier it is to get food now.
When I was in Japan, I went with Johnny Gray to, I forget the name of the company now, where there's basically a company in Japan where you go in and they teach you how to cook in like a big kitchen. There's a chef and they're actually teaching you certain techniques. And these are really popular in Japan, and they're also popular in China, but for different reasons. And then I've seen this in the US where you basically go into a Whole Foods or like a PCC here in the Northwest, and they have like a kitchen and people sign up for classes. So with those in-person classes maybe kind of going away for a while, there's no reason why you wouldn't want to take this and actually learn how to cook in your own kitchen.
With your own equipment. I mean, I think that could be huge because everyone's oven is a little bit different and everyone owns different, quality of cooking utensils and equipment. So I don't know. I think it's a cool idea.
I think the biggest thing, Mike, and I think Chibo was the one to address this, right? Which for me, the thing that people don't realize is that audiences will forgive just about anything in video except bad sound. And there are I've seen so many like virtual trainers, to your point, Jen, who don't use a microphone, right? Like they're yelling, or you hear like podcasts. I'm astounded by the people who go on podcasts and still sit in like a conference room and talk on speakerphone into their Zoom or whatever, right? Like it's the technical stuff, I think, that is probably the biggest inhibitor for this, because it's just it can be such a bad experience. Camera angles, audio, just, knowing when to switch between things, having good lighting, all of that stuff.
Yeah, I think also the ability to, if we're going with the gym at home sort of parallel, initially what was hard was there was no way to sort of, like if you're in a super fast cardio class, there was no way to sort of keep up without completely losing track of what was going on in the video if you didn't know what you were doing. Like, is there a technical way to, just slow down, back up, pause? I think all of that is important for any kind of cooking class too.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought the AV part up, Chris. They really focused in on that. They also enabled the platform to allow for multiple camera angles. But I'm with you on like a lot of times you'll see media people or podcasters from fairly big media companies with really poor audio. So I'm glad that they're addressing this, because most chefs are not thinking about having a super high end AV setup.
No, and it's not even that you need super high end, but that's not what they do, right? Their whole thing is making delicious food. So why would they care that you should have a lav mic set up properly so that people can hear you and, have an overhead camera? Like, they shouldn't have to think about that kind of stuff.
Thanks, guys, for doing this. Have we convinced you, Chris, to that Chibo's here to stay, or you're still not? You think it's still like a pandemic related thing?
Well, as my pappy used to say, you got to shoot the wolf closest to the sled. So the biggest thing for me is, am I going to get an Anova oven? That's the bigger question I have right now, as opposed to, am I going to take cooking classes? Because I want something that does all the work for me.
We're all going to be fighting to do that review, apparently, because everyone wants to try it out. So Jen's like,
nah, I'll be reviewing the Bon Bowl, which finally arrived.
Oh, did it?
It arrived?
It arrived, yes. So,
remind readers what the Bon Bowl is.
The Bon Bowl is it's basically an induction, a burner that uses induction heating that you can throw all the elements of whatever you want to make into a little bowl that comes with it and heat it up faster than you would on a stove. I think the idea is, throwing together a quick meal at home using what you've got, and not in these giant portions. Like, it's a single serving device. So I will be going to Trader Joe's at some point and buying some stuff to make a week's worth of Bon Bowl meals.
Because the bowl is special, right? Like, it's just like a regular, like a soup bowl or something.
Yeah,
that
it's
has
like
the induction material.
Yes.
So you cook it and then you just pop it off. And because it's induction, it's not like super hot. So you can just go eat it.
Precisely. Yeah.
It's the cook and eat from the same container. It seemed like the perfect thing for college students, and that's why I bought one for my son.
What are you saying, Mike?
Or single people, or people living by themselves. Have you ever really moved beyond the college years, Jen?
My family suggests not.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, everyone. Thanks.